So we're going to start by examining the impact that 2020 has had on the HR operating model. Beth is going to share insights from two working groups that she did, one focused on HRBPs and another focused on shared services. And then I'll talk about some of the insights that came out of the working group that I ran, focused on centers of excellence. So with that, Beth, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we held a couple of working groups on the HRBP role, one last fall and also one this spring. And there were themes that resonated, to both of those groups, and I want to share those with you today. So, as you all know, many companies were going through HR transformation prior to the pandemic, and this included the move to more strategic HR business partner roles. However, what we found during the pandemic was the momentum here was slowed, and really the pendulum swung back towards more tactical work during the crisis, which is natural for us to expect during the crisis. Some aspects of that were more firefighting and less focused on strategic work. At least on the surface, it felt like it was firefighting and not very strategic. But I think what you'll find now is there are lots of strategic thinking and ways to do work differently that came out of kind of those firefights at the time and is influencing how we're going forward. The second thing was really about the change from HR really focusing and building data and analytics and decision making. We were really focused on building out those skills and capabilities in our organization, but really had to flip to thinking about dealing with our employees with more empathy. So kind of old-fashioned HR in that sense. But with everything that they were dealing with the safety of themselves, the safety of their families, et cetera, it was really important to think about how are our employees feeling and what should we do about that. The third thing we saw was that HRBPs, had been focusing more on driving performance through things like centralization and systemization of support. Now the focus was more on how to get work done with maximum flexibility for those employees who had to work from their homes while taking care of sick loved ones and homeschooling children. So that flexibility muscle, we flexed a little bit more. Next, HRBPs spent a lot more time on diversity, equity, and inclusion and mental health issues than we had in the past. And lastly, a number of companies mentioned that their role, HRBPs started playing a bigger role in talent acquisition. That just became kind of a point where there needed to be all hands on deck, and HRBPs became much more involved in that than is normal in their roles. And naturally, the physical location of where everyone worked changed, or most people outside of manufacturing and things like that, and caused new challenges in how HRBPs had to stay connected to employees. And lastly, the thing that we saw as well was greater silos appearing in HR than ever before. And the fact that we really need to focus on one HR, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more in our trends later on. So that's what we saw from the HRBPs. On the HR Shared Services Working Group, there were some similar types of things going on here, similar to the HRBP kind of role transformation. Many of our companies had been centralizing and moving to HR shared services, or many companies called HR operation or organizations. And for those that were thinking about it or in the process of moving more services to those kinds of organizations, the pandemic really helped them because it helped them skip some steps other companies had to take. So for example, sometimes, depending on your company culture, it takes a lot of buy-in and change management to move those processes centrally. But that wasn't needed here. Self-service was necessary given so many were working remotely. Employees needed new technology and the ability to operate differently. And so this helped shortcut for some of those organizations. However, you should always be aware of what may or may not work in your culture. For instance, there were several organizations in the working group that we did that had mentioned, they had moved employee relations to a centralized organization, whether that was in shared services or a separate group. But they found that didn't work for them. They missed kind of the high touch and the personalization of some of that, the differences between the business units that they were supporting or the countries, and they reversed course and decentralized these employee relations types of groups. Another thing we found that as HR shared services grows, the things they manage move from those more reactive tier 1, tier 2 services to more strategic tier 3 types of services, and those start to become organization enablers. And so there really were some great advancements here as a result of 2020. And, you know, ongoing debate, I know this is a debate in companies I've worked with, that, you know, should HR be part of a global business solutions area, or should it be part of HR? And there certainly are pluses and minuses to both. And you need to think about that within the context of your organization, your culture, and how your employee experience, how you would like that employee experience to be done. And you know, next bullet there, employee experience does continue to be paramount, and that should be the first thing you think about as you build out shared services on the delivery side. And then lastly, we had a lot of discussion in the working groups on measuring the success of HR shared services. So how do you do that? And some of the tips were through external benchmarks, so comparing yourselves to others, and, you know, this idea of employee experience and measuring through net promoter scores, which is more of a marketing tool and kind of foreign to HR, but is something that we're certainly seeing happen within the shared service arena. So those are the learnings from my 2 working groups. Brad, back to you for the COEs.